So we'll begin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome from SAWTEE, and thank you for accepting our invitation to this webinar. And I'm Paras Kharel, Executive Director of SAWTEE. And to just give you a background of this webinar, this is a second in a series of webinars we are organizing in collaboration with the Asia Foundation. And this is part of a civil society forum initiated to discuss common issues of regional interest in South Asia and to chart out pathways for cooperation at regional and global levels. So to recall, the first webinar was held on the 23rd of September. It discussed BIMSTEC master plan for transport connectivity. So innovative ideas emerged from that webinar. For example, creating an enabling environment for landlocked countries, Bhutan and Nepal, to operate seaports in India, for example. Suggestions were also provided on improving upon the master plan and how to effectively implement it. So today's webinar deals with climate change, an important issue. We, of course, have an eye on the COP27 of the UNFCCC, but we also want to discuss long-standing and emerging or forthcoming issues in climate change, and hence the need to look beyond COP27. And the devastating floods in Pakistan provide a pertinent setting, although a tragic one, to any discussion on climate action. Apart from debate over mitigation, issues of adaptation, finance, and loss and damage, we are also seeking deliberations on the implications of climate policy or climate action for industrialization aspirations of South Asia, which is, after all, a very poor region and which is host to 4 least developed countries. And industrialization still eludes some of these countries. And furthermore, the interaction between climate and trade policies is set to gain prominence in the years ahead. And yet this is, I find, an under-discussed issue in civil society platforms. Hence, we are organizing this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will later be disseminated to the wider public. Now, I'm pleased to have experts from the region in the panel. We have been researching and thinking on climate change issues, agenda, and policy from diverse angles. Among them is Mr. Ajay Dixit, who will be moderating this webinar. Ajay ji is the founder, Institute for Social and Environmental Transition, Nepal, Kathmandu.
I'm the advisor now, Parasi.
Hey, sorry, advisor. He was the founder, he's the advisor now. He's an Ashoka Fellow who has led different projects on climate change adaptation, resilience building, disaster risk management, energy, food security, and water governance. He possesses an MSc in engineering from the University of Strathclyde, Glasgow, UK. He has directed regional studies that examine climate change impacts on flood, drought, food system adaptation in South Asia. In short, we are in highly experienced and capable hands. Over to you, Mr. Ajayji.
Well, thank you, Parasi, for that. A little bit of longish introduction. It's been a long time, long sojourn. So when I look back my career, I figure I kind of sometimes get lost. What I am and what I did and all that. But regardless, thank you very much. And then welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this important webinar organized by SAWTEE on the forthcoming COP27 in Egypt, discussing some of the issues, agenda, and expectations. About a year ago, the parties, the UNFCCC parties met in Glasgow. This was during the pandemic, but perhaps, this was during the pandemic, but then perhaps the first global physical meeting, and then expectations were very high that the meeting would kind of, meet some of the long-standing issues, as you rightly pointed out. But perhaps the outcomes were mixed. Yes, there were certain movements, achievements, certain areas, but then question of finances, a question of increasing mitigation ambition, question of issue of loss and damage, and others kind of were unaddressed and unmet. So from Glasgow a year ago, that's where it all began in 1770s, the fossil fuel-based pump system that kind of was one of the foundation leading to, industrial civilization, the idea of energy efficiency, and so on and so forth. We've now moved to, Egypt. But in this year time, I think the global context has gone fundamental shift, a change rather, or become more complex. The war in Ukraine, the energy crisis that we see in Europe, as well as other countries, the sort of increased geopolitical tension among powers, the pandemic still on, perhaps a little less intense than it was 2 years ago. And then, of course, what we have is increased instances of extreme weather events across the world, and particularly in South Asia. And that, as Parasji mentioned, we can think of heat, the scorching heat in South Asia, India, Pakistan, droughts in other places, extreme floods. And then, of course, comes August, and then Pakistan has this devastating floods, which was worst in its history. Now, indeed, disasters have been part of our sort of natural history, and then the ways we have done with our rivers, water, floodplains have kind of exacerbated the impact of disaster. We still have huge question of vulnerability, social vulnerability that needs to be addressed. Yet, it's increasingly being clear that these events are being exacerbated by climate change. They're becoming more extreme, and they're becoming more common and more frequent. So clearly, these are issues of concern that really needs to address. For many of us in our part of the world, this is an existential kind of a threat. Clearly, how this will play out and how this will be addressed, the whole question of climate injustice, I think, is an issue that will be discussed in COP27. How will it play out? What seems to me is that perhaps the global dynamics is much more complex and perhaps polarized, if you will, to arrive at a consensus on these kind of complex issues. Perhaps this is not a very conducive moment, for arriving at things like finances, governance, loss and damage, and so on and so forth. Yet, from our perspective, this is a platform where these issues have to be discussed, have to be recognized, and perhaps and taken forward. And hopefully, we wait to see. But then let's see, how it goes. But in the meantime, we would like to welcome this panel again. We'd like to talk about the issues, the challenges, the agenda, and our expectations. And to take us through this conversation in this webinar is Mr. Manjit Dhakal. Manjit is the head of LDC support team at Climate Analytics. Manjit, and then Dr. Nityananda. Dr. Nityananda is with Council for Social Development, New Delhi. He's the director. So Manjit, Dr. Manjit, Mr. Dhakal, and Dr. Nityananda will kind of make a presentation and set the stage for the discussions. And then we'll go to our sort of discussions. Dr. Famida Khatun, Professor Kasturi Das, Dr. Akar Yunus Ahmad. Hi Akar bhai, how are you? Good to see you after a long time.
Thank you.
Yeah, Irandati Pathiraja. And then we'll open the floor for discussions. The way we want to move forward is to have a 15-minute presentation by Mr. Dhakal and Dr. Nityananda, and then we will open the floor for discussions, and each of you will speak for 5 minutes each, and then we will perhaps have 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll again come back to the discussions and then see how the question goes. And later we'll have Dr. Nityananda and Mr. Dhakal respond to some of the points raised, and then at the end we'll try to wrap it up by 2 hours, by 5 o'clock. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So without further ado, let me take this opportunity to request Mr. Dhakal for his presentation. Manjitji, the floor is yours.
Ajay sir, namaskar.
And then 10, 15 minutes. I will just raise a hand when it is 12, right?
Sure, perfect. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
wonderful. Thank
I'll
you.
try my best not to take up full time. I hope my screen is shared now. You can see this. Ajay sir,
Can you speak a little louder, please?
Ajay sir, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can. We can see your screen, but can you speak a little louder?
Okay, I'll try my best. Thank you, sir. So I'll try my best even not to take the 15 minute that is allocated. I will present very briefly on the issues, the major agendas for COP27 and our expectations. Most of these are influenced by the position of the least developed country group with whom I work very closely, but also relates very much with the context that we have in the region, and as many of the countries in the region are also affiliated to the group. So all these discussions are driven by the climate science. So it's important to get this clarity in terms of where the negotiations are moving ahead, how the reports coming from the IPCC and the other latest science are acknowledged. We are in the world of 1.1 degree of warming now, and it has been clearly mentioned that now it is becoming extremely difficult to limit the temperature warming to 1.5 degree, that the target that was agreed in Paris. However, the report also presents the number of scenarios that the warming is still possible, where the countries have to take ambitious action. So with the current level of actions that countries have presented, the target that countries have shared in their nationally determined contribution that we call in this process is still not enough. Also, further progress from the 1.5 degree report that was released by IPCC in 2018, the latest 6th assessment report in its working group 1 confirmed that the likelihood of reaching 1.5 degree is coming nearer. So it can be any time between 2021 to 2040. This date was much later in the report that was published 2 years earlier. And as I said earlier, with the current level of warming, the world is still not in line with what has been committed. It was also mentioned in those reports that the limiting warming to 1.5 degree can go hand in hand with achieving the sustainable development, the poverty eradication, the improvement of health, the facilities, and access to the clean energy. This also talks about the shift in the technology. It may not be necessary for the country to still depend on coal or other form of the fossil fuel to develop. So it also kind of clearly indicates the way the technologies are advancing and how the countries can adopt to them. But it also clearly says that the longer we wait to act on this, it will be more difficult, it will be more expensive, and it will be more dangerous because then there comes the discussion about the loss and damage, which is beyond the adaptation limits where the countries are experiencing now. We are at this COP27 in a very special situation compared to the COP in the previous year. The geopolitics obviously is not supporting us, not in line with what has been expected earlier. The war in Ukraine has kind of impacted the momentum. It has disrupted the energy market. We have seen and hearing about the crisis in Europe, the impact that has also hit India, Africa, and this resulting energy crisis have made it clear that clean energy transition is also the security matter. That's what many countries have realized. However, we have thought that this should have been served as an incentive for countries to phase out the fossil fuel and move quickly towards the renewable energy. But even the countries with the capacity, who have resources to do that, are still depending on the fossil fuel. I think which obviously is not supporting this agenda. Some of the recent happening in terms of the U.S. official visit to Taiwan, which has stirred the U.S.-China cooperation, among other issues also on climate change. And these two major emitters, the first and the second emitter, not discussing regularly on other issues, including climate change, obviously have impacted this process. So we will be in Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt, in this context where the bigger player will have a very different agendas. However, we have also seen the latest report by the IPCC as well as the International Energy Agencies that shows the scenario that the fossil fuel is not a transitional fuel. This has been a discussion that we have heard, we have seen in many forums, many discussion that whether the gas is a transitional fuel to move towards the renewable energy. But I think this also clearly shows the risk in terms of creating the standard assets per country. There is investment on this transitional fuel, which may not be able to give a country the long-term benefit, and getting locked on this kind of technology obviously will not be helpful in the longer time. The report by the OECD has also clearly confirmed that the phase out of the fossil fuel for OECD countries should be sooner in terms of 2025 and other later in 2040. So we have a evidence in terms of the science, but I think now it's a time to use it. Having talked about many of this depressing fact, I think there are also some positive momentum that are going on in terms of how it can support this process. Despite of the fact in terms of what I explained earlier, the global momentum for ambitious climate action is still building on. Countries are coming forward with the updated nationally determined contribution indices, the climate action plan, but however, this also clearly shows that the countries whose emissions are higher, particularly the example that we can quote here is the G20, who are responsible for the 80% of the global emission, unless if they don't act. I think the emission reduction plan presented by many other countries obviously will not be enough. There is also drastic fall in the cost of renewable energy, the drastic fall in terms of the cost of the battery storage. The momentum of the electric vehicle that we have seen all around is increasing. The real fact that we can see in Nepal as well. The global renewable energy, this was the latest, the findings of the latest report of IEA, which confirmed that the renewable energy capacity is forecasted to increase by over 60% between 2020 to 2026, and which is equivalent to the current global power capacity of the fossil fuel and nuclear combined. So yeah, and also the investment are shifting, the technology breakthrough are coming up. Some of the example that I provided earlier, the business and the market preference are also changing towards the renewable energy. Very briefly, in terms of the three key issues that we have at COP27, I've tried to make it simple as possible without going detail on the agenda items and of the UNFCCC. Obviously, the ambition for limiting the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is one of the key highlights at this COP, because the world is heading towards warming to 2.4 degree with the current level of targets that the countries have presented. And even if all the policies, climate policies are realized, even those that are not presented in the NDC, we will still be 2.7 degrees Celsius. This is a fact from the Climate Action Tracker. As I said earlier, the IPCC has confirmed that the limiting 1.5 degrees is still possible, but it's required the deep and the sustained emission cut. In fact, today, in next few hours, the UNFCCC will be releasing the NDC synthesis report that will be compiling the information that will be synthesizing the targets that all the countries have presented in their current NDC. So let's see whether in which direction that is moving, whether that will help us to achieve the 45% of emission reduction compared to 2010 by 2030. The global is per the NDC synthesis report that is in front of us as of now, that still shows that the emission is rising. The science have said emission has to go down by 45%, but we are in the world where the emission is still rising. Even if all the targets are implemented, it will be rising by 15.9%. So it's totally the opposite track. So for this, there was a mitigation work program that was agreed in Glasgow last year. The work program itself is already agreed, but the content of the work program has to be finalized at COP26. So many details, including the sectors that needs to be included here, the timeline of the work program, how the emission reduction will be tracked, how the support will be provided for developing country to implement this. All this design has to be done at COP27. The second key topic at COP27 about climate finance, which is also seen as a trust building exercise in this process. And we obviously do not have a positive fact here. The 100 billion per year target that was agreed in 2009 to be mobilized from 2020 to 2025 is still not achieved. The latest report of the OECD shows that we are nowhere near to 100 billion mobilization. We don't have a latest report because it takes time to compile all this information. So the finance that was mobilized in 2020 is only 83 billion, and still there is a lot of the component related to loan. There was a report released by Oxfam yesterday, which also confirmed that even with this amount, it was less than 1/3 of the fund that was actually actually reached to the countries. So there is a big finance gap. The needs of developing countries are increasing, and the estimation range of trillions of dollars. But this is the fact where we are. The Glasgow Climate Pact also agreed last year to double the finance mobilized for adaptation, reference to 2019 level. We do not have any information about whether the adaptation support has been doubled or not. So this is also another topic to be discussed at COP27, how that doubling will be tracked, whether that doubling of fund has been mobilized or not. There is also a discussion about how the climate finance will be mobilized from post-2025 onwards. And this should be based on science. This should be based on needs of the developing country. So then to help with all this, there are two political processes, the high-level ministerial dialogue on 100 billion goal and the discussion on the new collective quantified goal. So let's hope this discussion in Sharm El Sheikh will come up with the outcome that helps developing country mainly to deliver on the outcome with the support provided and helps in terms of the trust building. Also, the fact is that we don't get funding at the COP. The COP is not the forum where the funding are placed, but this is a platform where these decisions are made. The final point that I'll be sharing here is about loss and damage, which we have been reading about. One of the key topic, the main topic that will be driving, and that will be the one defining the success of the COP27 Sharm El Sheikh. So across the globe, the impacts of climate-related events are increasing. The climate change is overwhelming the adaptation capacities of countries, inflicting on economic and non-economic losses. Developing countries have asked to set up a loss and damage finance facility at COP26, which was not accepted, which was not successful. And then that started the process called Glasgow Dialogue to discuss on setting up the fund. So it didn't establish the finance facility, but it agreed on the process to discuss about this. So that's the negotiation where we are. And at COP27, the group of developing countries, the G77 and China, where we have 134 developing countries, have submitted a proposal to discuss about funding arrangement for loss and damage. So this is a part of agenda now. We call it provisional agenda in the UNFCCC process. The agenda has not been agreed yet. It has to be agreed on the first day of the opening plenary. So it is in the document which is not agreed yet. So the first challenge after we reach to Sharm El Sheikh will be to agree on what to discuss. And if that agreement is done, then only the discussion on loss and damage finance will start. The COP27 therefore must also decide on the institutional arrangement for one of the network mechanism that was established called Santiago Network on Loss and Damage, which will be supporting developing country to mobilize technical support. So finally, my last slide, in terms of the way forward and how we will define the COP27, what our expectations are. Obviously, this is the last opportunity, I would say, for us. We know we have come here up to 27th COP, but the way the impacts are rising, the way the targets are not sufficient to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degree, the impact that the current generation is facing, as well as the future generation would be facing, is very difficult to imagine. So the COP27 is the last opportunity for countries to close the 2030 ambition gap. This should be addressed by the mitigation work program that has to be agreed. It should also send a clear signal in terms of mobilization of climate finance, the access to climate finance, the support for adaptation, building resilience, developing country to implement the low carbon initiatives. It should also define the adaptation goal, which is one of the agenda. And it should have a concrete decision in terms of funding arrangement for loss and damage. So what I believe is any compromise that we will be making in Sharm El Sheikh would mean compromising the future generation, the lives and the livelihoods of the communities, and it will be against the findings of the science. So that's where we are. I'll close with sharing this one of the blog that we have written recently relating with the flood in Pakistan and what are the impacts that our countries are facing in South Asia. Thank you, Azhar sir. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Manjit. Thank you very much for your, sort of short, but then very clear, sort of setting the stage as to, what it means for global South and countries like ours to, be in COP27 and then, highlight some of the challenges, the question of finance, the question of increasing ambition, the whole issue of loss and damage, and then of course the adaptation finances. You sort of sketched that quite well. Now let me request Dr. Nityananda. Now, of course, as a very important player, a powerful player, an influential player, India will have a sort of a major role to play in that platform, and then to also speak for concerns of country like ours. So let's hear what Dr. Nanda, for your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Dixit, and thanks SAWTEE and Paros for inviting me. As a matter of fact, Dr. Dhakal's presentation provided a very good basis for what I would be speaking on. As he also mentioned that the agenda is not yet fine, but the COP27 objectives are of course decided, and that is urgently reducing greenhouse gas emission, building resilience and adapting, and commitments to finance climate action. So these three are the main issues and objectives that need to be fulfilled, and the agenda has to, keep in conformity with that. Hello. Yeah. Now we are talking about South Asia. So obviously we all are aware that, we are among the most vulnerables, vulnerable regions, vulnerable countries as South Asia, despite the fact that per capita emission actually is among the lowest, And we also know that in terms of achievements, we are discussing that with Dr. Dixit in the very beginning. If you look at SDGs and where we stand, we are also among the laggards. So that means our adaptive capability is low, our vulnerability is pretty high, and our development requirement is also very high.
Dr. Nanda, can you please run your slides on the slideshow mode?
Yeah, it's not coming. I am running on slideshow mode only.
Okay.
Yeah.
See.
So we know that climate change will impact most of these SDGs, be it poverty, be it food security, be it health, women empowerment, water security, energy security, which is clean energy for all, is SDG 7. So all those will be impacted by climate change, which is already happening. Mitigation efforts generally have positive impacts on SDGs, but they also can divert resources from our development requirement, our adaptation requirement to mitigation. That's why you have to be very careful about choosing our mitigation action areas. And we saw from Dr. Dhakal's presentation also that climate change is happening. Chairman also said we have concrete evidence that, to give an example, the number of cyclones in a year in both Bay of Bengal region as well as the Arabian Sea region has doubled over the last 2 decades. The number of cyclones that you used to have earlier and were having, they're just doubles a year. So that shows the kind of climate impact we're having. And of course, we all know that the temperature balance in the Bay of Bengal region and to some extent Arabian Sea also responsible for cloud formation in whole of South Asia. So all these, rainfall being very erratic. In India, we are seeing this year some areas got extremely, low rainfall. Farmers could not cultivate. At the same time, some areas, even Bangalore now is facing problems. We are having huge, untimely and excessive rainfall. So this is happening also because of climate change. Now, the region suffers from substantial energy poverty, as I said. Many people do not get minimum energy they require. Forget about clean or unclean. In absolute sense, they don't get energy. Industrial development is pretty low. India is relatively ahead of other South Asian countries, but compared to other industrialized countries, not even China, but India's position is also not very good. As a matter of fact, India tried sometime, there was some narrative in India that, India will have service-led growth. Now we know that that was not to happen, and service-led growth strategy actually failed in India. So now in India, we are seeing government is trying to get back to manufacturing, boosting manufacturing sector. So we are again talking about industry-led growth. Now, this is true of other South Asian countries also. Now, except Pakistan and Bangladesh, other countries are even backward in terms of industrialization. But even in Bangladesh, manufacturing is more in like garment sectors. So their energy intensity is still low. The moment they go for, which they are going actually as of now, they're diversifying to other industries, including shipbuilding, which is very high energy intensive industry, shipbreaking, which is very high energy intensive activity. So those will have problem. Next, yeah. Paras, yeah. So obviously, no, previous one. For whole of South Asia, keeping energy and consumption and emission limited to where it is not going to be possible. In fact, in the short to medium term, it's going to increase. Now, for us, it's difficult to predict what will be emission, energy consumption, because we know in a developing country, growth rate can be very fluctuating. If you are performing well, it can be double-digit growth. If you're not doing well, it can be 2%, 3%. So how much growth will you have? And what will be the kind of structural change in your economy? We don't know. If it is highly going for industries which are energy intensive, then you are not going to predict that. Compared to developed countries, they are moving from more of industry to service sector, which is basically low energy intensity. for them prediction is much easier. Just to give an example from our own region, per capita energy consumption in Sri Lanka, that used to be, I don't know the current situation after the crisis, is used to be higher than per capita energy consumption in India in terms of residential or personal consumption. But if you look at the whole economy, Indian per capita consumption is much higher, because Sri Lanka doesn't have energy intensive industry, which India has. But at the same time, because of higher human development, Sri Lankan people at their household level, at their personal level, they consume more energy. This dichotomy we have to understand. So when we say China's energy intensity is very high today, it is true in some sense. But at the same time, whatever China is producing in terms of industrial goods, they're being consumed by people all over the world. So they also have their footprint there, because you're consuming those goods. The same is true everywhere. Africa per capita consumption, to give an example, is the lowest. But if you look at from where they're getting their whatever consumption they have, whatever emission they have, mineral sector is a big culprit there. But most of the minerals that you get from Africa, they're not being used by Africans. They are being used by Europeans, they are used by Americans, even Asians, especially Chinese. So who is responsible for those energy consumption? This is not just about historical consumption that we have, even in present term, whatever consumption is happening here and there, to whom they should be attributed to, it's still a big question. Now for us, ensuring economic development and providing adequate clean energy to all is a major challenge. So we need to industrialize. In India, we understand now it's very hard way, because we tried to bypass industry. We wanted to leapfrog to service. It did not happen. So, same thing will happen to other South Asian countries. When they try to develop, they have to get into industry. Now, if you don't get technological change happening at the global level very quickly, where they can do industrialization with very low energy intensity, with very low emission intensity, industrializing with low emission would be difficult for all of us, all the South Asian countries. Now, this is the challenges that we have in our own region. But then we have challenges from outside also. As I said in the beginning, the climate change that is happening now is happening not because of what we have been doing collectively, but what mostly the people or the economies of other regions have been doing. Dr. Dhakal was talking about 1.5, but current commitment level that we have, whatever we had even in Glasgow, it will not, stop us even with 2 degrees Celsius level. Forget about 1.5. So I'm not very optimistic about that, and forget about improving further from Glasgow commitments. Even sticking to Glasgow commitments is not going to be easy. Now, countries have made, net zero targets. Even India has made net zero targets. Now, as I said, they are not ambitious enough. That we understand. They would not ensure below 2 degrees. But are they credible enough? The problem is that they are not even credible enough. Are they on the track, to meet 2030, 2050 targets? For that, have they achieved, do we have clear milestone, clear roadmaps for all countries who have committed for those net zero? Even India do not have even now clear roadmap. Other countries also do not have. So these are all talks in the air. So we do not have clear roadmap. So the critical question before South Asia would be, what would be our balancing effort between mitigation and adaptation? Some mitigation would have, as you understand, what you call co-benefits, would impact your own development, impact your own adaptation. That's fine. But otherwise, adaptation is very, very necessary. Resilience building is very, very necessary because climate change is happening. It will continue to happen and it will harm us. Now, coming to back to roadmap, European roadmap for net zero, which is slightly better elaborated compared to other countries or regions, but their net zero emission target was crucially dependent on Russian gas. Now, we don't know after this, Ukraine-Russia war, whether that gas will be there and whether EU will be able to move ahead with their roadmap, whatever they have. Then, people blame Donald Trump for being climate skeptic and not doing anything. But the issue is bigger there. It is not Donald Trump only. We know what George Bush also did. It's a kind of the anti-climate action view in India is very, very strong. Let's not, deny it. So suppose in the next election, Biden loses and Donald Trump or somebody like Trump comes back, you never know what will happen in US, whether they will stick to whatever plans they have given, whatever roadmap they have given, they can again go back. This has been there, in the US, politics for a pretty long time. Next, Paras. Next. Yeah. So let's see some of the, I will not, you might have seen so I will just, draw some basic points. I'm not getting into details. US, as I said, they did not have any target for the earlier one, but now they have given targets. So if you do back calculation, their target for 2030 in 2015 would be 26-28%. But progress so far has fallen short. It's 17%. EU progress has fallen short, so they are not on the roadmap. Brazil fallen short hugely, but one interesting point about Brazil is that Brazil has not been doing well economically for for the first table for us. First table. Yeah. So Brazil, emission is all about what they do in the Amazon. And we have seen for the last few years under Bolsonaro that they have destroyed Amazon, and it creates two impacts. When Amazon burns, a lot of emission happens, and also carbon sink is destroyed. So their fluctuation in, or not being able to meet this is largely because of their inability to contain that forest damage. Russia, their commitment is not very high, but they are, interestingly is quite on the path. South Africa, again, their commitment is very, very low, and they are almost on the path, but their commitment is very, very low. So let's not forget that. Next, next Paras. Yeah. So this is about China's commitment. Again, China's commitment has fallen short as of 2020, as of 2019. So in terms of carbon intensity, I have put China and India otherwise because their nature of companies is different. These countries do not have commitment for absolute emission reduction. So their commitment is for carbon intensity, share of fossil fuel, forest increase, and this kind of thing, wind and solar power, and this kind of thing. And China has put 2060 as a net zero year. Now, as we are seeing from the table, they are far below the target, interim target. So it's very, very unlikely unless they are able to kind of boost up the planning and implementation very, very aggressively. And again, 2060 net zero, there is no basis for, there is no roadmap for that. So it's all, all talk in the air. Next, if you look at India, Again, of course, carbon intensity, the 2019 achievement is not too bad, but India might achieve that. Share of fossil fuel in power capacity, India might achieve, but then of course the target is not very high, so achieving might not mean much. India's target for wind solar is very ambitious, but as you see, achieving that target is going to be very difficult. Forest volume increase, it depends on what is the base year you take. So I'm not getting details of that. Net zero year 2070, again, I would say India did not have any planning. Nobody knew how India declared that, but the discussion here is that it's a kind of guesswork. It's a kind of game that if developed countries can achieve net zero target by 2050, that means they will have lot of advanced technology, and then we'll go to these technologies and we'll be able to make by 2060. That is the wild guess we have made. Now everybody knows if those countries achieve their targets, then pressure will be on India, and of course India will try. But if those countries do not meet their targets, nobody will question India anything about why you did not make your targets, because they'll say, okay, look at European Union, look at US, look at Japan, look at China. Nobody could make it by 2050. So why are you asking me? So
would you wrap up, Dr. Nanda, please?
Yeah, so failing would not be a shameful act for India. Next, please. Yeah, so the current state of play. So if other countries do not meet their targets, South Asian countries will have what we call double jeopardy. You suffer from not those taking actions. At the same time, you might have diverted resources from adaptation, resilience building to mitigation. Your development interests have not been addressed, and you will suffer. So, as I said before, developing a roadmap would be important. And the question is that the current leaders, they will not be there to defend whatever they did. So you cannot believe that I promise you I'll do. So it's not a personal promise you can be, rely on. So it has to be on a very credible roadmap. Only then you will say, okay, this is likely to happen. But as of now, everything is in the air. So now, next, Paras, developing a roadmap is not easy, but it's easier for developed countries because of their growth rate being stable, their technology regime being stable. They have better idea about emerging technologies, and their countries are more or less service based. Now the problem comes that US would say, the consumptions, the lifestyle of our residents are sacrosanct. Now, their high energy consumption is not because of production, but because of personal level consumption, because of personal level, household level consumption. So that is where the crux problem lies. Now, 2 days back, the famous Indian author made a statement that the power elites know that climate change. I would not be so much probably pessimistic about it, but he says they know everything, but they are waiting for Malthusian adjustment, which essentially means let poor people die, and let poor people die, then of course climate change will be lower. But that's also not going to happen. So to that extent, I'm not agreeing, because even now poor people will die, but they are not responsible for this climate change. The rich people have to reduce their consumption. So we have to go for that. India kept buffer, but next slide for us. So obviously this finance is going to be most important for us, South Asian countries. We will require technology, and we have to understand which technologies we need for adaptation. Of course, it will be largely agriculture technology, water storage technology, irrigation technology. We do need assessment and viability analysis. we need to have elaborate planning, and for that we do not have expertise. At the same time, you cannot depend on outside expertise. So we have to develop our capability and then develop our planning, so it has to be done by us. It cannot be done by outsiders. So capacity building of human resources of our own technical people is important. And so all those, financial and technological requirements have to be met by financial help from developed countries. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nanda, for sort of, presenting a very realistic landscape. You really highlighted the challenge. The South Asian countries, of course, are trying their, sort of within their limits to, address the challenge. But at the same time, we have unaddressed problems of poverty, of, sort of marginalization, of, providing basic services to our people, water poverty, energy poverty, health poverty, and all that. And all those kind of, add on to the, new challenge that, global climate change imposes. I want to be sort of, optimistic. I want to be positive. I want to say things will change. But then you highlight the immense challenge that exists on the ground. But then, as we move forward, let's now, go to our discussants, and let me request Dr. Fahmida Khatun for our thoughts and comments. Dr. Khatun is the Executive Director of Center for Policy Dialogue. She's been a friend for a long time. We have worked together. Really welcome you, Fahmida. And as I said, if we will take about 5 to 6 minutes for your initial thoughts, then we'll go to other discussants. Then we'll have a couple of questions, and we'll come back to again for the conversations. Okay, right?
Yeah, okay, sure.
Thank you, Fahmida. Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank SAWTEE for organizing this very important and timely webinar on COP27, which has several implications for the South Asian countries, because we have just heard from the previous speakers that South Asian countries are vulnerable to the impact of climate change, and also the South Asian countries have been also experiencing various weather events which are actually not only severe but also unpredictable. This has been highly variable, and also the annual rainfall has declined in some regions that had triggered droughts and increased also in other areas. So there have been also flash floods, and we have seen that during the summer, the summer we have passed this year, how the South Asian countries felt the heat, and also the deadly flood in Pakistan. So these are all the manifestations of the severity of the impact of climate change. In that context, so the countries within South Asia are taking a lot of measures. If you look at the National Adaptation Plan of Actions, they have plan of actions, and they have designed various programs, various measures, and they have also undertaken commitments in the NDCs. Not only large countries like India, but also the other countries have taken commitments voluntarily. And in case of Bangladesh also, we here in Bangladesh, we have seen that the NDC commitments have been increased prior to the COP26, in fact, and with foreign support, the commitments is even higher. That's for all other countries. So now the COP26 has been a historical event in the sense that for a long time, the COP events had lost its importance, in fact, significance, because it had rather become an annual event, just routine event, but without any substantive or meaningful outcome. But from that point of view, the Glasgow Climate Pact, which was the outcome of the COP26, had a lot of significance actually for not only for the world itself, but also for South Asian countries, the poorer countries, least developed countries. So as has been delineated by the previous speakers and also the first speaker actually, that what were the outcomes of the Glasgow Climate Pact. If we just can remember some of these outcomes, one important one has been that emission reductions commitment. So the countries had undertaken, particularly the advanced countries, but there are also discussions and debates that the emission reductions commitment had not been enough yet to achieve the global temperature goal. And we have seen that how, because of various global events, the COVID-19 and then the Russia-Ukraine war had really changed not only the geopolitical circumstances of the world, but also economic, social, and environmental commitments. Now, as we have heard from Dr. Nityananda, that many advanced countries are now adopting or reverting back from their clean energy to, they are also relying on the coal-based energy sources. So, which is a serious deviation from the commitments, because the advanced countries are responsible for carbon emissions and GHG emissions. Indeed, the South Asian countries emit only about little over 8%, and to be precise, it's 8.3% of the global total emissions. So therefore, you can easily understand that what will be the implications of this reverting back from the climate emissions reductions commitment. The other attention at the COP26 was that there was this attention towards global rule on finance for adaptation, which is a welcome move because that they had objected to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability to the climate change impact. In fact, the Glasgow Climate Pact refers to the inadequate resource mobilization under the climate funds by rich countries. And as we know that at the COP15, the advanced countries, developed countries, committed to mobilize $100 billion a year by 2020, and also. But on the other hand, this report by OECD in 2019, it shows that as of 2019, only 78.9 billion could be mobilized. And again, the fund composition of fund shows that the fund is biased towards mitigation. About 64% of total climate fund is for mitigation, which is actually the problem of the developed countries. The poor countries, the least developed countries, and most of the countries in South Asia, they need funds for adaptation, which is very, very low. So that's an issue, even though there has been renewed commitment, but the contribution towards adaptation fund and also towards more disbursement rather, and also commitments are needed. The other issue, which was a positive move, which is relevant for the South Asian countries and for the LDCs also, is the loss and damage, which received attention than ever before. There were some, some discussions prior to the COP26, several climate vulnerable countries, they had demanded for creating a new financing facility, which are exclusive to the loss and damage. we have, after COP26, we have seen that some countries, I think Denmark, for example, it had also come forward for this, for making payment for loss and damage, which is a very positive move, actually. So this is also an example set by a developed country. So this has strengthened the case for loss and damage, and it will also encourage the other countries. So so I would stop here because I don't have much time. But what I would like to say that these issues are still there. These are ongoing issues. These are not resolved. There was a ray of hope in during the COP26, but for COP27, the strengthening of these commitments will be needed much more than ever before, simply because the global geopolitics has changed a lot, which has also influenced the global economic scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fahmida. Thank you for highlighting this sort of percentage between mitigation and adaptation. The funding allocation. And if I remember, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina did talk about making it 50% sometimes. So maybe that's something we like to pick up on in the next round. Now, let me now request Professor Kasturi Das for her thoughts. Dr. Das is Professor of Economics and Chairperson, Sustainability and Social Responsibility at the Institute of Management and Technology, Ghaziabad, India. Professor Das, the floor is yours. Please take about 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll come back again.
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I have been listening to the beautiful presentations made by my previous speakers. I have been requested to talk about the interface between climate change and trade and some of the issues that are coming up there. And I will be brief and just try to give some ideas about that intersection. And what I'll do is that I'll pick up some bits of what Dr. Nanda has already mentioned. And good afternoon, Dr. Nanda. It's good to see you after a long time. And so, you were mentioning in your presentation about who is responsible. For instance, if some countries are producing some goods and it is not that they are consuming the entire thing and some part of it is being consumed by others, then who will be held responsible? So let me start from there, because that gives a good context of this interface between trade and climate change. Because if you look at how emissions are calculated under the UNFCCC, and we are aware that it is based on production-based method, that is depending on the geographical boundary of a country, whatever is being produced within that boundary, that is something that is regarded as emission coming out of that country. And it is based on that production-based emission that whatever commitment, the indices that we are talking about, whatever the ranking we are talking about, that which country is the highest emitter, which is the second highest emitter, everything is based on that kind of production-based approach. Now, if we talk about the other approach, the way we can also look at it is a consumption-based approach. And that is about, if you look at the consumption of a country within the geographical boundary of the country, whatever is being consumed, how much is the emission associated with that consumption? Now, these two accounting for a country will not be the same. And it so happens that, there are studies and there are calculations done which indicate that many developed countries are actually in a position where they are net importer of lot of emission when we undertake this measurement of emission based on their consumption. Basically, what is happening is that it might be that in terms of their production related emission, they are reducing. But to what extent they are reducing their emission when we look at this consumption-based accounting, that is another question altogether. So that is one important point. And actually, if you look at the emissions associated with international trade, we will find that over the past few decades, the emissions which is accounted for by international trade, that has been growing. And as per some estimation, in 2015, if you look at it, an estimated 27% of global carbon dioxide emissions from fuel consumption were linked to international trade. So that's the kind of emission which we can link to international trade. It is clear that in today's world, when we are talking about a globalized world, a world of global value chains, it is very difficult for us to think of in any climate agenda which is completely delinked from trade agenda, no matter, even if some countries feel that that kind of delinking is still possible. In my view, that is very difficult. That is one short point I would like to start with. Since the time is limited, I would like to mention a few things, some trends regarding and the scope for the interface of trade and climate change. One important thing is that one thing we have mentioned about the data and the emission intensity of trade. The other thing is that there comes the question that whether trade policy or trade regime can help achieve the climate change related agenda or the objectives that we might have in any of the South Asian countries or any country for that matter. There comes the question that whether trade can be a facilitator or whether trade becomes a barrier. You can look at it from both the angles actually. Sometimes trade regime could turn out to be a barrier in terms of climate action. Just to give you an example, if you look at some of the WTO disputes that have come up over the past few years, we will find that there are, a lot of disputes that are emerging in the area of renewable energy space. And these disputes are actually targeting some of the measures undertaken for promotion of renewable energy in some of these countries who are trying to promote renewable energy by using different kinds of measures. But some of those measures might be violating WTO principles and legal requirements. For instance, local content requirement is one such measure, and India itself faced WTO disputes on that in the area of solar energy under the national solar mission that India has got. Local content requirement under that was questioned. It became an issue. It went under the scanner under the WTO. So there comes the question that if the countries are trying to do something in the climate space, and if on the other hand we find that the trade regime is creating some kind of barrier there, whether trade regime can be made more facilitator rather than barrier. Now, how can trade regime be a facilitator? There, one can look at various ways. One important way, I think, for South Asian countries is if you look at the need for technology, and we have heard from our previous speakers about not only mitigation, but also adaptation. And we know that there is a lot of gaps in terms of availability of technology, and there comes the question of technology transfer. Now, this is not something new. And if you look at the, the negotiation, the discussion that has been happening under the UNFCCC, technology transfer is one of the agenda items that various developing countries, including some of the South Asian countries, have actually raised. But it so happens that it has remained a non-starter under UNFCCC. There have been demands that whether we can actually create, intellectual property rights regimes which are more flexible and help in terms of technology transfer to developing countries from developed countries. That has also been a non-starter. So, these are some of the ways one can try to facilitate and, trade policy can help climate agenda. But not much has happened regarding that. Another important area is sometimes we find that there is, for renewable space, there may be need for providing subsidies, etc. And again, we have a WTO agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. And some of those subsidies might actually come out to be violating some of those requirements of the WTO agreement. In that space also, there is this discussion that is happening that whether there is any scope for changing the rule book or any way we can help facilitate any kind of subsidies that might help in the renewable energy space. So I think given the time constraint, I stop at that, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We'll come back to you again. I'm very glad you raised this question about technology transfer. This has been a subject in this whole climate discourse for a long time, and then it's been a non-starter.
Dr. Bakar. So there's been a slight disconnection on the part of the moderator. Please go ahead and.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Paras, and thank you to SAWTEE for bringing us together on this subject. I'll in fact be short. I think my very esteemed fellow panelists have touched upon a comprehensive set of issues. So let me just start by presenting a very brief perspective from Pakistan. As you all know, that we have been severely impacted by the effects of climate change. Currently, the global rankings rank us at 8th most affected country by climate change. And you've seen the recent loss in the floods, which is now estimated to total around $32 billion, including the direct and indirect loss. And we've been impacted by 4 main channels, of course, including life and livelihoods, infrastructure, energy, and food security. Most of which have been touched by my earlier speakers, my earlier panelists as well. Now, apart from what has happened, of course, I think the more important aspect is to really unlock the financing for future, the financing for damages, but also then for financing for adaptation, mitigation for future. Now, in that area, our current estimate is that until 2050, for adaptation purposes, the country requires $14 billion per year. And for energy transition, another $10 billion more specifically for this purpose going forward. And the fiscal space is too low, of course, to support this kind of a huge financial envelope which the country requires at this point. And the contribution by local stakeholders, including the private sector, is minimal going forward. So one really requires a lot of capabilities as well as diplomatic efforts going forward, maybe headway with scientific community as well going forward to really unlock those possibilities which could support this kind of loss, as well as make much more resilient development possible going forward. Now, at the country level, what Pakistan had committed at COP26, there were 4 main promises. One, of course, was a coal phase out. And at that point, of course, the kind of energy price volatility that we have now seen after the Russia-Ukraine war, it wasn't there or not so much there in full blown impact that we are now seeing. We're also committed to seeking share of finance from a carbon transition. Pakistan also signed a global methane pledge, limiting methane emission going forward. And there was a 5-year climate resilience program with help from the international support. So these are the 4 main areas in COP26 which we were promising. Of course, some part of this has gone forward in terms of policy and practice, but the glass is still half full. Now, the third aspect that I want to touch was expectations from COP27 and maybe technical issues around those expectations. The first issue is that a country which has been impacted so severely by the floods, how do we attribute the loss and damage? And then, of course, against that attribution, how does one claim for climate justice? While, of course, there have been efforts at the multilateral level, but the capacity to do this at a national level or even at a regional level were found missing in the wake of this disaster. Second was that while, of course, climate financing had to be doubled by the developing countries going into COP27, this hasn't happened. So one of the least things that one can now expect coming out of COP27 would be the financing to avert and minimize loss. One doesn't hold high expectations on other verticals, but probably this is where some commitment can be made going forward. The third aspect is around capacity building and technical capacity to actually use the assistance that comes through in COP27. And therein again, I think we as a region really would need to step up. There are institutional gaps. I can speak for my own country that at federal government level, at provincial government level, at the level of regulators across the country, we have done very well. We have a national climate change policy. We have provincial climate change policies led by two of our provinces. But then the whole of the government approach is also required to coordinate these policies going forward. And donors who come forward with their climate financing pledge often complain about the coordination that has to be led by, of course, the national level government. And that, to me, is also a function of local capacities in my country as well as in the region going forward. There are also some technology transfer needs that one hopes will be resolved or will at least be discussed in more detail in COP27, and those technology transfer needs of countries most in need will come into picture. The approaches to loss and damage have already been discussed by other fellow panelists, so I won't be discussing this further, but advancing carbon markets is something which we as a region need to be discussing more. And I think while at a SARC level, while at SCO level, we continue to talk about it, there are other forums in the region as well. But we need to have more detailed discussion when it comes to implementation going forward. So maybe the bottom line of my intervention as discussed, and then I'll just stop over here, is that going into COP27, we of course need to be very sort of careful about, have we done what it needs to, have we done what we had committed in COP26 as a country and as a region, and going into COP27, will we be able to make much more realistic and pragmatic promises or demands from the developed countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Akar, for your thoughts. But then unfortunately, there is a little bit of an echo and then bit hitch with the conversation. So just a little bit of difficulty speaking on your thoughts and ideas. Nevertheless, now my turn is to request Dr. Arundhati for her thoughts and ideas and reflections. Dr. Arundhati, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dixit, and thank you, SAWTEE, for your invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So, as the previous panelists mentioned clearly, and the what the presenters brought forward, so actually the what South Asia has to contribute for climate change is comparatively low when we compare to the other countries, because our emission levels are actually low. Since now we see climate change as a kind of, as I think Dr. Nityananda mentioned that because there is no one responsible for the climate change who do the emissions. So it's still happening, and what we need to know, like we can say it as a kind of a situation where the tragedy of commons, because there's no one responsible, and so if it is now for a country like one country can say that if the actions of that country affect the same country, we can say that we are responsible for that, and then we reduce the emission levels and so on. So mitigation has become a kind of a difficult thing. That's why I think COP27 has focused on achieving like more implementation basis this time. So according to them, I think they have lots of concerns on climate financing, adaptation, then industry, and regarding gender and youth participation, and as well as they are more on like getting the view of the civil society as what you are doing today. So and concern on energy, biodiversity, and finally about the solution day based on different like views from the different sectors. So they are next going to have a solution. So based on that, actually then what is the major contributor to the climate change is the energy sector. And considering the fact that with the invention of fossil fuels during this industrial revolution, we know that this global warming happened. So now we are trying to reduce the emission levels to at least to keep this global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the thing is now, since no one is responsible, this is not going to happen until implementation targets are well or effectively implemented. So it is said that everyone should work on towards a common goal. So our contribution may be low, and as it is clearly mentioned, if I can share my screen, yes. Now our energy intensities and our per capita energy levels are very I think I can't share the screen. That's okay. So if we see now, if we compare the per capita energy consumption among Asia Pacific countries, for example, the gigajoules per capita consumption in Singapore is nearly 600, whereas India it is, yeah.
Doctor, you can share your screen now, I think, if you try.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You could just
Yes.
continue, you know, don't worry about it.
Yeah. I think now you can see. Sorry about that. Yeah. Just
There you
grab
go.
these graphs, because just to show now where we are. So most of our South Asian countries are like, if you consider the our Asia Pacific region, we are consuming a very low amount of energy. So we can see these developed countries in our region, they are consuming much more than us. So here's Sri Lanka and India, and Pakistan here and Bangladesh here. So sorry that Nepal is not included here. And next, I'll show you how our GDP per capita compared to other countries in the region. So our consumption is actually very low. So it says now where we are. So this shows a comparison of where these two goes together. So we know energy consumption or the energy availability, it defines our economic growth. However, now, though we consider this as a kind of negative point at the moment, Sri Lanka is also a kind of energy dependent country, import dependent country. More than 50% is imported because our transport is totally dependent on imported fuels. So I think the same happens in most of the South Asian countries. So it's, I think in one way, it's a good move for us to welcome these mitigation options in terms of adapting kind of renewable energy technologies. So since now in SDG 7 and SDG 13, they consider about SDG 7 considers about providing sustainable, affordable energy for everyone. So since that target is there, so those are overlapping with the NDCs, the Paris Agreement, what we are here. So and so because of that, since there's a like need for the developed countries for to finance the developing countries, so I think much needed assistance should be received from them for the South Asian countries. So it's a kind of win-win option for while mitigating actually the climate change. So we can achieve our energy security, because now with this energy dependency, I think we don't have a kind of option to go with the fossil fuels unless we have resources. I think India has some coal resources and Bangladesh, but Sri Lanka doesn't have any fossil fuel resources so far. So I think because of that, it's a good opportunity in one hand, and forestry can be considered as kind of where we can get a kind of mutual benefit with, since the funding, climate funding is available for those activities, and as well as we can consider like other adaptation options, because food security going to be in trouble because of the climate change, as well as like economic crisis like Sri Lanka and Pakistan are facing. So with that, I think we need much technological assistance, expertise assistance for our food security, as well as both the energy security. Since like developing countries, we have that technology gap as well as this investment funding gap. So, and our responsibility, I'm not telling that we are not responsible for climate change, but our responsibility, as previous speakers mentioned, is quite low comparatively. But still we are responsible for protecting our planet. So we need to consider in a way like planetary boundaries to protect the environment. So in that, with that, I think we should get much assistance from the developed nations to expedite actually, or to achieve the so-called these targets. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Arundhati. Hello, Amro.
Yes.
Now, yeah, so do we have anybody, wanting to ask some questions to our presenters and panelists, please? If you could raise your hand. All right. Can I then take this opportunity to ask both Manjit ji and then Dr. Nitya, and then to our panelists for some questions, if that's okay, Manjit ji. Hello.
Also, sir, namaskar, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you all for your presentation. From the presentation, what comes to me is kind of a pretty, sort of a serious and concerning context. On one hand, we have this, global meeting coming up, which has, to really navigate and address some of these serious challenges. But then, if we look at the landscape in global South, particularly South Asia, a number of sort of elements that comes to my mind from what you presented, what Dr. Nanda presented, and then Famida, Dr. Wakar, and Arindhati at the end, and Professor Das. One, we have development challenges. We have to provide development in terms of, if you think of quality of life, education, health, energy, water security to large section of our population. Large section of our population still don't have that basic services. Second, climate risk is increasing. That the emission of perhaps most of the countries in South Asia, if we leave India for the moment, are pretty small compared to the global emission by some of the developed countries. And of course, they had the historical sort of chance of emitting that. And then, of course, because the risks are increasing, adaptation is a major challenge. But then, as you rightly pointed out, things are beyond adaptation. Limits to adaptation have been reached, and then loss and damage are increasing. So how do we kind of, how do we then, think about how we move forward? How do you think, Manjit ji, COP27 would come out? Are you very optimistic? You've been, party to this meeting for a long time, many years. What do you see? What's your perception? What do you think?
Thank you, sir. I think at the end, it's the action that we have to take at home. This international process will guide us, will provide us a framework. But at the end, I think it's important that at the home, our political masters are aware of this. The policy planner consider this important topic in the planning process and also in the implementation. That matters. In terms of the international process, there are hurdles. As you also rightly said, and also because of the current geopolitics, we have all the information from the science, but there are difficulties. What I don't agree is for the development, it's not necessary that we have to adopt the same model that the West has adopted in past. Even if we plan to build, for example, we keep on discussing this in case of Nepal. Even if we plan to develop east-west railway in Nepal, it will be. I think, like, even if we think it will be difficult to get those old steam engine train or the diesel engine train, the technology has advanced now, so we will have to move towards the electric train. So we will not get those high power light bulb even in the market nowadays. Those are replaced by the lead, the CFL, and now the lead with very few watts. So and we have seen that also in an example of when the administration changes in US, and the former president, when he was trying to advocate or the business for coal, the market didn't respond in that way, because it is clear that now with the private sector will not have profit in the high risk of the standard assets that can go ahead. So yeah, I think it's like for some of the countries, like, and I can take this special case of country like Nepal, where our source of energy is clean, and the emission is already very low. We will be the one.
But do we have time, Manjit ji? Do we have time, for example, given the pace of change and the impact that we see, and the sort of, rigidity and sort of, embedded nature of that structural context at the global level with fossil fuel. How do you see that? Very briefly, then I'll go to, Nanda, I'll come back again.
That's the reason we don't have time. So therefore, the topic about funding overall, the finance for adaptation, and the new discussion about the funding arrangement for loss and damage remains key. But it is also the real fact that the whatever the scale of fund we receive, if the emissions are not going down, that is not the permanent solution. So I think it has to go hand in hand. The major emitters have to take the emission down. The developed country, the country with who has a capacity in terms of resources, they will have to support the in terms of providing resources. So unless we take both hand in hand, it will be difficult. In terms of the situation that we have now, the geopolitics and the world is facing, I think this cannot be presented as an excuse. The geopolitics and other as an excuse means allowing or waiting for more people to die, more ecosystem to loss, more flora.
The humanitarian crisis is going to be enormous if you don't take action. All right, thank you, Dr. Nanda. When we look at India, there has been this tremendous sort of what do you call innovation, improvement, installing in sort of expansion of renewable energy and so on and so forth. I was listening to Delhi Chief Minister, Mr. Kejriwal yesterday, and he was talking about rate of electrification of cars in Delhi, which he argued was much higher than even California and New York. And of course, on one hand, you have the changes and kind of technological innovations going on, and you kind of sketched very rightly this sort of underlying the challenge that exists in terms of meeting this basic need. How do you kind of see India should kind of move forward, taking a leader of South Asia, if you will, as a major power, both in terms of political clout perhaps, as well as economic context. How do you see that? How do we take a leadership?
See, I mean, this sounds good, but when you look at what it really adds up to, then you realize that there is a lot of slips between cup and the lips. I mean, electric cars, you might be saying this is good, Delhi is better than that city. But how do you charge your electric cars? It's coal-fired power plant, and that is how your grid is, energized, and you are basically burning coal. You are not burning petrol or diesel in Delhi, but you are burning coal in Jharkhand and Madhya Pradesh, and then you are saying you are running a clean car. So this is how it is. Now, solar, wind power, we have created capacity, but what is the utilization of that capacity? What is the generation efficiency of that capacity? Our grid is still coal-based, and we have no answer to yet that your solar and wind are intermittent power. So how do you bring grid stability? Without bringing storage, which is still a big challenge. Storage is very expensive. So people say solar is as competitive as coal, which is partially true and partially not true. When you add storage charge, it becomes very huge cost. And so it is a big issue. And so if you are having battery car which has to be charged through grid, it's not helping you. But India has also gone for what is now being talked about is hydrogen power, which is still at early stage. We have seen some early success. Probably that would be a better option than to have electric car. So these are all, but now people got into electric cars. Companies have got electric cars. They will promote it, but it's not really. It's like shifting pollution from one place to another place. It's not shifting. It's not stopping pollution altogether. So these are important challenges we have to address. Now I see somebody has put
Question.
in the box question. Now, why India is
Reluctant to buy.
Yeah, this is the most unfortunate part that we have in the region. But those who have observed this Indo-Nepal power relation, for a long time, India has been telling Nepal that, look, we have a successful model experiment with Bhutan. Why don't you do the same thing? And Nepal was pretty reluctant. And, because of this politics, India could not get a foothold there. And then China got some dams. And now India thinks that, you did not give us and you give it to China. And also with China, you have to understand, India's relationship with China is very, very sensitive. For any country, when you have border skirmishes and, a lot of your army personnel are killed unprovoked, it creates backlash against that country. So for us, it has become a very sensitive issue. I understand that this should not have happened, but this is how it is. Ukraine war is very unfortunate. The same thing. But, then probably you have to find some way out. Now, try to see how Nepal keeps the Chinese, plant-based power and export the other power from other plants. So you have to probably manage that way. So if there is a will, we can find some way. But yes, that renewable power from China to India, Nepal to India should come. That is good for the whole of region. That would probably give some grid stability that will make India, more capable of using solar and wind power without bringing instability to grid. So it should be used, and we have to find out how we manage it. Yeah. Everything is frozen, or Dr. Dixit is frozen, it seems.
How do I speak? Not the computer को उन्हें बैटरी में खींच देता बैटरी में खींच देता Why don't you get Hamida? Can I ask her?
No.
Hamida. Hello.
Hello. Paras, can you take up if Dr. Dixit is frozen, or it's everybody frozen? I don't know.
Hi, Dr. Nanda. I think they're resolving the situation. Just give me 1 minute. I'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nanda. I just want to now, request Famida, Dr. Famida. Famida, can you hear me? Where is she? Is she in? Dr. Khatun.
She's disconnected at the moment. We'll get in touch with her.
Okay, then can we go on to Wakar Bhai?
Yes, sir, certainly.
Wakar Bhai.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I mean, reflecting, looking at the images of Pakistan, the floods, the sort of a modern building sort of collapsing in less than 20 seconds, and the estimate of loss and damage. Can you reflect on, yes, the COP27 and the UNFCCC negotiation, all that, global challenge remains. Can you reflect on the, within the country challenges that Pakistan will have to do? You have now, Living Indus initiative that the government has cabinet has approved. So can you sort of reflect on a little bit on, how you might do things differently, how institutions might change, how you would begin to change the structure? So, some thoughts on those challenges, Waqar Bhai?
Certainly, sir. Thank you. Very important question. And because, of course, the country is no stranger to such disasters, we have a very strong federal level, national level authority, NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, which has been around for a good number of years with very strong expertise. And then NDMA has its provincial arms in all provinces, and then at a district level, it has its presence as well. But the fact remains that this year, the very sophistication of this authority, the fact that it had the experience of dealing with such disasters in the past, even that was tested, given that this kind of emergency had not been witnessed by any similar disaster response institutions anywhere in the region. And the kind of rain and flash flooding that occurred in such little time, it just caught these institutions by surprise, who, by the way, were there on ground in a very short span of time. But then the story didn't end over there. The span of the disaster was also prolonged. So it wasn't just the fact that rains and the flash flooding happened on one specific day in the week or the month. It was happening in a surprise manner across September and October. And those changes or those weather patterns were not being predicted. It was very hard to predict them or their outcome of it, which really created the matters very difficult. Second, I think what I may add to your question, your response to your question, is the early warning alarm systems, which have been around since the earthquake of 2010. While, of course, their sophistication has been validated by international agencies, we have trained so many other countries in these early warning alarm systems. But even these systems failed in mountainous areas, where, for example, the river flooding, which swept away even the offices of those institutions which are supposed to respond, or places where people had to find refuge. The fact that even SMS-based messaging was not possible given the power breakdown. Those conventional early warning alarm systems are not going to work now. And that is a major learning from this disaster.
You had major flood in 2010, right? I mean, a less magnitude, but then nevertheless a major flood. What was learned in that flood and what was unlearned, that exacerbated the disaster in 2022?
Yes, so I think the first and the foremost difference was the speed and pace of the disaster, given that the disaster response institutions simply didn't have the time to respond. It wasn't about the manpower, it wasn't about the money, it wasn't about the relief goods, It's just that the speed of the disaster was really unprecedented compared to 2010 or earlier episodes. Second, I think it was the recurrent nature of the disaster, given that the rains and the flash flooding happened not once, but thrice within a very short span of 2 weeks. So it was like those spells which were happening again and again, which were testing the capabilities of those who had to reach out to those who were stranded in those areas and take help over there.
All right. I think, of course, the humanitarian cost has been high, but I think the learning from what transpired, in the basin, I think has huge implication for, other countries of South Asia, including, the Ganga Basin and the Brahmaputra Basin, and hopefully we'll continue to do that. Are we in touch with Famida? Sautik ji?
No, not yet.
Not yet. All right. Can I then ask Dr. Pathiraja for some thoughts? Dr. Pathiraja, are you online?
Yes, Dr. Dixit. Yeah.
Yeah, in South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, we're sort of part of that, sort of connected landmass. And then of course, Sri Lanka, you are part of Sri Lanka, South Asia, but yet, you're an island. And of course, you guys went through a sort of, tumultuous political challenge, a few months ago. Now, how do you see, some of these climate, and of course, if I remember many years ago, you had, sort of massive floods in Colombo, right?
Yeah.
Urban floods. So how do you see some of these, climate-induced disasters playing out, and then, the Sri Lanka government and society, others responding? How do you take these challenges?
Yeah, actually, it's a major issue, the urban floods and the heat island effects. Both are very issues related to climate change in the urban areas. The most vulnerable area to these floods is the western megapolis region. So it has aggravated because of these unplanned settlements, because now the people in climate vulnerable areas, the rural areas, mainly the farming community or the poor resource communities, they migrate to these flood-prone areas in the urban areas. So because of those unplanned settlements, those people face another kind of disasters because of this flooding impact in the urban area. So it's a big issue. So this has been like aggravating over the time. So that's a major issue in the urban areas. So there are no plans, I think, to make them provide with facilities or the services to these people. So this migrating community is a big issue actually, because they are not getting proper services other people in the urban areas having access. So it's a biggest issue in this area. And there are some flood basins in Ratnapura and few areas. And other than that, there are some kind of landslides actually. Severe landslides are there, but the most prominent, where the number of impacted people is high, is the floods in the urban areas. So since now the country is facing a huge economic crisis, I think making adaptation measures to improve the lives of these people is a difficult thing actually. So it's a major challenge our country is facing. Now, Sri Lanka was classified by this German watch in 2017 and 18 consecutively. I think first place or the second place, like in the Sri Lanka was among the top 10 who are like most vulnerable to climate change. I think other South Asian countries were there. So yes, so the impact is high actually being a small island.
All right, good. Thank you very much. We're almost, close to the, closing time, 5 o'clock. I just have, one question that I would like to ask Dr. Nitya and Manjit. We seem to be confronted with sort of, humongous problem, problem at the global level, challenge at the local level, the challenge across our countries, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka sort of seems to be common. How do you kind of move collectively, Dr. Nitya? If you could just take 30 seconds to reflect, do we do it individually, or there is a sort of a space for collective endeavor. Did you get my questions?
Yeah, I thought Mr. Dhakal will be responding first, or he's not.
No,
here.
you do that, and we do that, and we go to Manjit.
Okay. Well, before I go to that question, I thought I would bring one important issue that, when we talk about climate change, we forget that, these, excessive rains, untimely rains, these are climate related, but the kind of damage they're creating, they are to a large extent human made. Our governance challenges, our corruption, the kind of urbanization we have done, we have killed the rivers, we have killed the drainage system. That's why those problems are getting. If you have come to Delhi, Dixitji, you might have seen that Jamuna River does not exist. Same is true for Pakistan. Many of the rivers at some point would not exist. Because the river has come to the position where it's only the summer flow, that it can carry. Because you pick up so much of water, you did not allow minimum flow of water through the rivers, and the river starts sinking. And with time, its natural capacity destroyed, and then when some excessive rains happens, you cannot handle. This is true for both Pakistan and India. Now,
And
to
also
what
Nepal.
extent relative
Nepal.
relative position, I would not be able to say Pakistani friends would be better, but I know this is a problem in India and Pakistan, in other countries also. Okay, come to next question. Is old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. We're talking about water management. We're talking about, somebody raised this question, so why not renewable power from Nepal? And I said it will be helpful for India for grid stability, for utilizing more of solar and wind power. So these are essential. And suppose India is, of course, technically a bit advanced, in terms of, say, if India gets good success in hydrogen power, this will be a game changer. And should India not share that with everybody? Because if Pakistan improves on climate, if Nepal improves on climate, it will be good for whole of humanity, not for India or Pakistan or Nepal. So obviously, whatever differences there, we have to bury them somehow. We have to come together. We have to go for cooperation.
Thank you. So climate change requires for us to come together and stand together.
Yes, yes.
Manjit.
Yes. Thank you, Aziz sir. Aziz sir, you are best placed actually to respond to this question with your understanding of the reason, your experience. But yeah, I think there is no doubt in terms of working together, when we see the impact of climate change, they are not constrained in the political boundaries. We have seen that in all the examples, the impact that we have seen in the eastern part of Nepal on the flood, the Kosi flood that extends up to Bihar, and the other state in India, the impact that we can observe in terms of Glacier Lake outburst flood, and some of the consequences and some of the reason for this has now also been attributed with the black carbon that we release in the region itself. We blamed the global north for a long time in terms of emitting, but now the black carbon are much stronger in terms of the impact, even though their life are short. So I think from both the side, in terms of reducing emission, taking action, in terms of sharing the solution, the technology advancement that countries have in the region, and in terms of responding to the impact of climate change, let alone the loss and damage, regional cooperation, there is no other option than the regional cooperation. Yeah, and this has been well acknowledged in the Paris Agreement as well, in all the operating articles. Yeah, so I think there is a framework, there is an understanding. We all agree on that. So I think it's more a political master to change the mindset and implement this, realize this. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Manjit, and thank you, Nita, Dr. for these thoughts. Now, before I end, let me take a few moments, just sort of reflect on the conversation. And thank you, Wakar Bhai, and then thank you, Dr. Pathiraja. Well, I have been in this conversation, particularly water, climate change, disaster, etc., for a long time. And there was a time when I thought, at least in South Asia, there used to be a lot of conversation. We used to travel. Of course, last 2.5 years, the pandemic has kind of, curtailed those interactions. But seems to me, the scale of conversations has kind of gone down. While we need to engage the global north and the politics and whatever at that level, we also need to get together, stand together, and learn from each other, and perhaps build our own system to be able to respond to this emerging challenge while advocating, questioning, challenging this whole notion of environmental justice, climate injustice that's been perpetrated, and we've been kind of forced to bear the consequences. The West had a upfront advantage of having used this energy budget, and then kind of providing the basic services, development, etc., for their citizens, while we were kind of left back on that historical opportunity. So yet I think the challenge for us is to ensure that we continue to engage, we continue to be optimistic while being realistic of the challenge that faces, and then of course move to make things better. With these few words, I really like to thank Manjit Takal, Dr. Nitya Anand, Wakar Bhai, Dr. Ahmad, Famida, Dr. Kasturi Das is left, and then Famida also left, and then Dr. Arundhati, Pratija, for their thoughts and conversation. I'm very sorry there was a little bit of a technical hitch in the technology that we're doing, so therefore there was a little bit of a disruption, but nevertheless we managed to present sort of South Asian collective concerns that COP27 would hopefully, I'm sure there will be lots of us, our friends and colleagues in that platform, and then highlighting some of these challenges. With these few words, let me again thank SAWTEE for this webinar, and then the opportunity of getting together. So we look forward to see you again. And I think there is a need for more conversation. COP will go and COP will go. COP will come and we'll have COP28. But I think in South Asia, at least we need to have more of such conversations and dialogues, for the common problem that we face. Once again, thank you very much. Have a nice evening and see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.